What up? What up? What up? It's the man Sean P coming in live. This is Sean P Experience, man. We back at it live on YouTube. All of my shows are special, so I need to get tired of me saying that. But this is a very, very special, unique episode. I have never had a show like this before, ever on the channel. I saw the brother going live with Dr. Wade a few weeks ago. My friend Dr. Wade, and had some very good political views, things he was breaking down that I think the whole community needs to understand in a real, real serious way in these times that we live in, man. So I got on the screen my brother, the Meta Catalyst, man. How you doing, my brother?
Man, I am doing great. Times is hard, but we gotta be locked in. So I had to make some time, and we just finished up Dallas Startup Week. So now I feel like it's perfect to segue and talk about what really matters. So I appreciate you for the invite, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
You said the key, man. Things that really, really matter, man. I know so many times in life, in this social media time we live in, we can be so bombarded and like flooded with information, almost like a fire hydrant, right? So we need to be able to have a way to distill it and kind of clear the noise and find what really, really matters, man. So my first question for you is, man, how old are you? First of all, how old are you?
Yeah, so I'm 25.
25. I knew you was a young brother. 25 years old. So my first thing is, how did you even get like serious and concerned about politics at 25, man?
I think it starts roughly 9 to 10 years ago. Whenever we lost Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, and Tamir Rice, all within a span of a year. Um, we lost Trayvon Martin, I believe, a year or two before that, and I really wasn't cognizant of the situation then. I was 9 when Oscar Grant happened. I was 12 when Khalif Browder happened. So those things, I really didn't have a bigger perspective of what was happening on each coast. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and I was very spatial and proximate to my my eyes, So I grew up going to church in Oak Cliff. I went to a private Christian school in Oak Cliff before going to public school in Cedar Hill. So, if it wasn't in the confines of those four walls at any given moment, it wasn't something I was really aware of. That was up until the advent of social media. So whenever we saw the video of Tamir Rice, whenever we saw Alton Sterling selling records, whenever we saw Philando Castile uh, actively trying to defuse a situation and lawfully carrying a firearm, that was what broke my heart. And that was what really let me know that this could happen to any one of us, because there was the notion, as what we're dealing with today, a lot of the propaganda of 2012 and 2013, if I could take you back, painted Trayvon Martin to be this thug, to be this violent young criminal that was brutalizing a man, and that man had no other choice but to take his life. At 25 years old, now I know that that was nothing more than propaganda. But in the moment, I was 11 and I didn't know better. So when I saw a kid playing with a BB gun in a park, which I come from a country family, so I used real guns by the time that I was Tamir Rice's age, because we hunt. I was gifted a BB gun for Christmas one year, so that symbolism directly attached to me. And then when I understood what happened with Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, that no matter if you're doing the right thing, you could still be a victim of an unjust system. That just let me know that there needed to be a awakening. There needed to be a call to action. There needed to be a fight. And it wasn't going to be an easy fight. It was going to be a fight where you could get slandered. It was a fight where you were going to be subject to political violence, to state sanctioned violence, but it was a fight that you needed to be willing to do. And that's what brought me to the civil rights movement. So I joined my local NAACP chapter. They didn't have a youth component at the time. So I led the effort to restart that after 40 years of being dormant. And from there, my entire perspective and paradigm changed, because I went from that small church in South Oak Cliff to the National NAACP convention, where I got to meet people like Reverend Michael Green or Stephen Green, Reverend Amos C. Brown, civil rights leaders that paved the way for so many of us to be where we are in the present moment, and help push us to where we need to be for the future. So that for me was really my foray into the civil rights movement, and all of that happened around the time I was 15 to 16, and that really just served as a solid foundation for where we find ourselves today.
So you mentioned a lot of those injustice situations, man. And of course, across the nation, across the world, a lot of folks had an immediate reaction. But we all see from George Floyd to now, so many things regress, go backwards, get pulled back. People lose that spark and that flame that they felt. Things happening so fast. It's the next thing, right? So my question is, how did you stay on track for years after those things happen? How do you stay on track and stay going, that fire burning way years after the fact?
One of my biggest priorities from a very early age is understanding what change at scale means, and not just being focused on in the moment being reactionary, but ideally creating institutions. Because very early on, I understood that this wasn't just a one-off scenario. It wasn't just a Alton Sterling is Alton Sterling and Philando Castile is Philando Castile. I recognized the pattern for what it was. And I understood who funded the pattern, who participated in the pattern becoming the pattern. And very early on, I was blessed to know that in order to disrupt this pattern, not for a moment, but for a meaning, you had to develop a deeply intentional and methodical approach that wasn't going to be done overnight. That's what really embedded the ideology of building grassroots political power came from for me, is seeing how a spark of an idea could manifest itself and turn into a community, a city, a county, a state, organizing and mobilizing around issues that matter to them. And then another thing that really painted the picture more vividly for me is being a lover of history. One thing that I love about not just the name of your podcast, but the entire Griot network. I have a signed copy of your book, the Griots and Griots, is because the ability to articulate our history from generation to generation is something that helped me understand the fight that I needed to fight in my generation, and where it came from and the precedent that was set in generations before. So, working with elders, understanding their lived experience and how it shaped my perspective and my politic is what helped me to create a consistent pathway of saying, okay, by the time I'm 16, I would have rechartered a NAACP chapter, but by the time I'm 20, I would have gone on to be on the state executive committee for the same organization. And then at 25, now building lines of intersection between different civil rights organizations. They used to call it the Big Six, and now we're looking to expand that apparatus outside of the traditional NAACP and Urban League to now encompass more grassroots, community-based organizations, so we could get that much closer to the issue. So that's just in a nutshell how I was able to be deliberate and intentional about having a long-term strategy and not just the reactionary, oh, well, they killed somebody, let's go march, but then 2 months from now we're not carrying that same fire.
So being a young man getting into this game, like you said 14, 15 years old and going forward, of course you're still in high school at this time. A lot of your peer base are doing things that teenage kids do. So like, what are some of your support systems like when it comes to like peers, family, community? Who did you have around you whenever you started being more and more politically aware? What did that look like as far as your day to day? How'd you get support in that?
So I'm a very devout Christian, and I believe that my faith is really what helped define my approach, because the Bible teaches us to be fishers of men and to articulate the message of the faith that we believe in. And I really feel like that type of idea carried me into how I engage with my peers, because I saw the opportunity to build that critical conscience, not just for myself, but for my community at large. So whenever I started the NAACP chapter in Grand Prairie, one of the prerequisites was that you needed 30 members. So it wasn't just a gargantuan effort by two or three people, and it was just the president and a vice president and a secretary at a meeting. You needed a quorum. You needed to have community facing events. You needed to plant that flag and be a beacon of hope for the community. And what that led me to do is at a very early age, invest in the leadership development. Same thing that we'll be touching on a little bit later, but investing in the leadership development and pipeline of my peers as well as myself. Because if we cultivate that community in a more collaborative manner versus a, oh well, this is an idea that Nicholas had, so everybody got to get behind Nicholas, that wasn't going to last long. That wasn't going to be sustainable. There would be no Grand Prairie NAACP Youth Council today if that was the case. So what we had to do very early on was say, who can we pour into while we're being poured into to cultivate a curated path for people to understand the urgency of the moment and then leverage their God-given talents and expertise and their passions to take up the leadership mantle to say, okay, well, Nick might have been the one that introduced me to the NAACP, but this is a unique way that I could contribute my skills. And I've seen people go on and leave the Grand Prairie NAACP chapter to become chapter presidents at their colleges or become chapter presidents and on the board for the adult chapters across not just the state, but the nation. So that's what building capacity and that's what a sustainable movement looks like. And I was very intentional about this not just being something that was on my resume to help me get into college, but this was something that I was able to make the community a better place than where I came into it as.
Wow. You mentioned being a lover of history earlier. You mentioned the civil rights movement. Who are some of the people that you love to learn about, read about historically that kind of like fuel you, motivate you? Like, yeah, man, I like what they did. I want to take up that mantle and keep that pushing. Who are some of those figures for you?
Man, so I have two people that I would be remiss if I didn't leverage this time to mention. Number one, obviously being who y'all think it is, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. While I studied at Morehouse College, I was a member of the King Legacy Scholars Program, where we got access to his archives and were able to read his notes, sit at the feet of the elders that studied underneath him. And actually, during my first trip to Morehouse College, I actually got to sit in on a class that was at the time taught by the late Tobe Johnson. And he was the person who was tasked with writing the speeches and helping to craft the strategy of Dr. King. So being able to see how, just from a campus visit for 3 hours, I got to sit in on a senior level class talking about the importance of upholding the democratic systems that we live in and how the parallels shape up to where we find ourselves today. That was history coming alive for me, let alone getting to go through the archives of the late Reverend Dr. King and see his handwriting and how he thought through some of the biggest issues that he faced at the time. And then another one, just to bring it more spatial to where I'm at in the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex, is William T. McDonald, famously known as Gooseneck Bill. He was the first black millionaire in the state of Texas, and he got that way from being a banker during the Great Depression. And his bank being ran so efficiently and effectively, he was actually able to lend money out at that time when most banks had to borrow. So he not only was a finance aficionado, he also was a community steward. And he built up the very same community that Mrs. Opal Lee grew up in. So I feel like that level of stewardship and that level of domain expertise and passion kind of blends itself together to make the persona that I would attribute myself to today. But especially with my background in corporate finance, but also deep connection to the civil rights movement of today. I'm looking at new and innovative ways and insights that I could glean from my elders and ancestors, like Gooseneck Bill, like Dr. King, and imbue that into how we approach some of the issues that we deal with today.
So you mentioned the phrase the civil rights movement of today. So many people look at the civil rights movement like as a snapshot of the 1960s, early 1970s period. Um, Hypothetically, based on what you've learned and read about Dr. King, what do you think Dr. King would say about today's time? Like they did all those things back then, and they spearheaded so many things, and we see what's going on now, and so many things are regressing so drastically. What do you think they would say about today's time?
Almost eerily, Dr. King wrote about this in his final book called Chaos or Community. Where do we go from here? And he mentioned the fact that we would be tasked with these moral and social dilemmas where we could either leverage the progress that they made as a foundation or let that hard work slip through the cracks. And unfortunately, in many ways, we've stagnated. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the state sanctioned and coordinated and institutionalized effort to undermine all of that progress that we've made. So it isn't just, oh, well, our community perished because we didn't want to put the work in. To a point, there are some instances of people getting, I would say in my own words, a little too comfortable and letting a lot of the progress that was made throughout the first civil rights movement be clawed back. However, I also understand that we are under a hostile government right now. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, the same division that was literally created to protect black and brown political power and voting rights, is now being used to persecute black and brown political leaders across the country, is now being used to undermine and defang a lot of the Voting Rights Act, which is why we find ourselves in the state that we are. And a sick perversion, I'll go as far as to say, of what it was initially intended to become. We now have the acting attorney general, Harmeet K. Dillon, acting like what she's doing is to ensure fairness, when in reality, it is an order that was handed down by a man who was violently racist, who was calling for the execution of black men for crimes that they were found innocent of. And now the same organizations that perpetuated programs like COINTELPRO, the same organizations that undoubtedly were behind the assassination of some of our community's biggest leaders, now want us to sit and believe that they are protecting our voting rights by allowing gerrymandering and racial redistricting to go on. So I think that it's both. And I think that if Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. were here today, he would bring this hypocrisy straight to the forefront, and he would task the same questions that he asked in the letter to the from Birmingham jail to the white clergymen. He would be asking of society at whole today to say, hey, like, if we have two eyes, two ears, and a functioning brain, how can we logically allow these blatant injustices to happen, and not do anything about it? A lot of people talk about making good trouble in the wake of John Lewis. However, unfortunately, we have a lot of people who are waiting for others to make good trouble on their behalf. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested nearly 30 to 40 times. He sat in jails. He was hit by billy clubs. He was thrown and stuffed into paddy wagons. I just learned through Kwame Ture, or also known as Stokely Carmichael's Ready for Revolution, his autobiography. There were 3 bloody Sundays. They didn't just get beat once. It wasn't just one casualty. And what I learned throughout that autobiography is that Bloody Sunday initially was not about a bus boycott, was not about a poll tax. Bloody Sunday was about police state sanctioned violence against the black community in both Lowndes County and Selma, Alabama. So if people were willing to make good trouble then, what are we doing now? What's happening that you're seeing with Texas redistricting is just a microcosm of what has subversively been happening across the country since the Voting Rights Act was passed. The same thing that could be said with the Civil War. There were never any real repercussions for the treason that happened, and ever since then, the same treasonous parties have been trying to wrest back control and claw back those protections that the same property that they fought to keep has been able and fortunate to enjoy. So that's what I think that he would point out, the historical context of what got us here, the deliberate and intentional institutional effort to undermine those protections, and then the role and responsibility of the leaders in our community, and quite frankly for all of us to be leaders. Oftentimes I hear this phrase that at times I'm conflicted about, that, oh well, we don't need any more Martins, we don't need any more Malcolms. And I'll respect some of where it comes from, but if we really take a thorough and critical analysis of where we are as a community, we are overwhelmed by bystanders. And there has been a deliberate, um, I think it's called, like, the term is kneecapping, where they debilitate your ability to actually fight back, and they cut at the knees of their opponents. I think that's happened for so long, so consistently, that now we have a crisis of misleadership, where if we were to get somebody of that same ilk that understands the urgency of the moment and rises to meet the occasion, then we would all be able to galvanize more confidently around the issues that we all know to be bad. So that's kind of where I sit with, and I hope that I'm doing his legacy and his perspective justice based on my personal study. But that's where I think that he would be coming from in the present moment.
You mentioned out there in Texas the redistricting, and they're redoing the map and the lines and all that kind of stuff like that. It's a very, very pressing matter. Can you give the audience kind of a understanding of what's going on with that and the macro possible impact of that is going on?
Yeah, I think that's actually a perfect segue, because everybody knows Reverend Dr. King for passing the Voting Rights Act. And what we're seeing in 2025, August 7th, just today, we had a Senate redistricting committee hearing where over 120 people registered to vote, and 117 of them registered in to be against redistricting. So the reason why this is even a topic of discussion is because since the Voting Rights Act was passed, there has been a deliberate and intentional effort to claw back, undermine, and inevitably repeal this Voting Rights Act. In 1965, a lot of the southern states said, no, we're going to sue this. This is unlawful. Well, it's federal law. But what happened since 1965? We've seen a globalized effort for the world to become more right leaning. And I want to be very clear as I say this, to give it a preference. This isn't about left and right on a political spectrum. This is about what is focused on race, class, and power. So, since 1965, a very slow and methodical game has been played. A lot of people are talking about what happened in 2024 with Project 2025. Do you know that that same foundation has been posting Project 2025 since the 80s? And they've
Since
been
the '80s,
they've been acting it out deliberately, slowly, and surely since the
man,
80s.
that's crazy, bro.
So that's part of what makes the Voting Rights Act undermining in 1965. They immediately started saying, okay, what are we going to do? They got us on this one. Are they going to win the war, though? Will we let them for states' rights? So, what we have, a watershed moment, I'll say, is 2013, Shelby v. Holder. That was a judicial case that was dictated, I believe, by the Supreme Court. And what it did is it struck a key section from the Voting Rights Act. Why would anybody strike any section from the Voting Rights Act? Well, here's along the same vein of the disingenuous assistant attorney general that we have in Austin now. They said in 2013, well, it worked at the time, but that's not the society we live in anymore. Who would genuinely believe that? That's not the time we live in anymore. So, what that did, what section that specifically struck is section 4B. And what section 4B was is called pre-clearance. So basically, before any legislative or congressional maps were to come into fruition, or any new voting legislation was to come into fruition, y'all could vote on it in y'all's house, y'all could approve it in the Senate, the governor could stamp it in your state. It does not become law before the courts review it and make sure that it is aligned to the Voting Rights Act. Pre-clearance. Well, what Shelby v. Holder did is it struck down pre-clearance. And just to give you a little bit of context, because we're talking macro, right? Shelby ain't, a variant of a Ford. I'm a car guy, so I like Shelbys. They're cool. They're cool cars. But Shelby is Shelby County, Tennessee, one of the most historically racist and repressive counties in the country. So they handed that win to not just Shelby County, but every other county like it, every other state legislature like Tennessee, to say, oh, well, now we don't need pre-clearance for voting rights legislation, or for us to change voting legislation. Now the floodgates not only are open, but they've actively dismantled the floodgates. So what do we see now? In 2024, following the election by, I believe, a month, we get a case in Galveston County by the most conservative court in the nation that actually contradicts themselves, based on another 1980 ruling where they established what's called coalition districts. And that's basically a legislative district where two minorities come together to elect their candidate of choice. And they say, well, we don't know if coalition districts are needed anymore. They're not necessary. You could do without them. So, what does the Civil Rights Division and the Assistant Attorney General of the Department of Justice say in a July 7th letter to the governor of Texas? Hey, we noticed that you have these minority coalition districts. We need you to do something about them. And we need you to give me an answer by the end of the day on what you plan to do about them. So, in 2 days, the governor of Texas adds to the special legislative session that was supposed to be about standardized testing for students, flood relief for what the tragedy we just witnessed in the Hill Country, and banning THC because they inadvertently made it legal back in 2018. Some of the smartest political minds that we have accidentally made THC legal.
You said accidentally.
Accidentally on purpose, so they could give Delta AG $100 million. But that's another story for another day. But that's what our initial special session was supposed to be about. But in a July 9th letter to the legislature, guess what was added as a top priority? Mid-decade redistricting. So how redistricting is traditionally supposed to happen is every decade when we do our decennial census and we get new population numbers to understand where people are coming to, where people are going, how much they're making, what their demographics are. That's when we reappropriate and redraw our congressional and state legislature lines. Well, what also came, not just a letter from Harmeet K. Dillon, but a call from the president currently to say, I need 5 more Republicans in Congress. Go find me their seats. So this isn't a redistricting effort because the maps change, or not the maps change, the population has changed so drastically in 5 years. This isn't redistricting because we formed a petition and we got it added to our general election that we just, as citizens of Texas, wanted new maps. This is because the president corroborated with the Department of Justice to help him find more congressional seats to tear away at black and brown political power, and to hopefully, if all goes the way that he plans, to avoid accountability through the House of Representatives. So,
This is always a very educational podcast. We're trying to catch up to speed, right?
oh
So
yeah,
those that don't understand like congressional seats and like how that works, you kind of give us a little breakdown on when we're seeing things about congressional seats and all this stuff on the news. Like, what does that really mean?
got you. So yeah, how Congress gets appropriated their seats is based on population trends, which is why the decennial census is so important. But what we've seen with the most recent census is the state legislature typically draws the lines of the Congress. So right now, the district that I live in, even though it's represented at the federal level, the state level legislature are those that pick where my zip code, my address, what district it falls into. So, to talk about what's top of mind and why I'm here today, as it relates to gerrymandering, that is a deliberate attempt to dilute the voting power of whichever party is not currently in power. So, there's calls of, oh, well, Democrats do it. Oh, well, Republicans do it. Well, anybody in control that gets to write their own maps, that's basically saying we're going to play a game. I'm going to write the rules and good luck. So, what states like California have opted to do is they have actually created independent commissions that that citizens sit on, that come together and use a data-driven approach to draw ethical maps. But when you leave it up to the hands of those that are currently in power, I mean, come on. What do they campaign on? The same data that's getting used to draw the maps. It's some of these congressional seats that come campaign time, they will completely skip over your community because you vote one way or another. Even for city council, the school board, the state legislature, they'll look at that and be like, how many registered Democrats or Republicans are in this zip code? Let's either put that one as a priority or completely avoid it. So that's why when it, yeah,
So my brother, whenever we have these census going around every so often, people that kind of ignore the census, are not worried about the census, and even historically, a lot of us didn't want to do the census for various reasons.
right.
This is the importance of that census, right?
Man, I am going to go as far as to say the congressional maps aren't even the most important part. People don't understand that tax appropriations for your county, for your school district, for your city council, that's where that data comes from. So if you worried about these charter schools popping up that are gonna be going and turning private and charging tuition now, where do they come from? Oh, well, for 30 years, people didn't want to do the census because they didn't want the government knowing about them. But what that did is for every citizen that doesn't complete the census, that cuts about $20,000 a year in tax revenue and appropriations from your city, from your county. So when we look at our communities that are resource starved and we ask why, it starts with things like, okay, well, did you complete the census? They even during 2020, because of it being COVID, gave extra time. And I believe on a in good terms, we got like a 70 to 80% mark in some areas. It should be 100%. Because now what the president is doing is he's just called for us to do a new census. Huh. Kind of convenient because he's getting a lot of national pressure. Like, hey, like, why are you trying to do redistricting mid-decade and it ain't no new census? He's like, well, maybe we should do a new census. So, what the key provision that he's looking to add now is historically the census doesn't ask about your citizenship. Now he wants the census to only be predicated on current naturalized citizens. So it's a part of this bigger anti-immigration push, and it's a subversive dog whistle to scare communities. Because to your point, right? That's just another excuse that just got added on for our undocumented citizens. Like, oh dang, if I'm not documented, I'm for sure not gonna fill out the census because they gonna know where I'm at. They gonna come get me. And with things like 287G, things like almost $150 billion being appropriated for ICE, they have more than enough technology to actually go about doing that. So now it's a part of a broader push, like I said, since the 60s, and I'm gonna be real, not since 1960s, since 1860s, to keep our communities disinvested, disillusioned, disoriented, and undereducated.
So let's peel back a little bit, a little more, right? If anybody watching this and they're getting curious, like, man, what are some things that a person can do starting right now at their local level, things like that in their state? What could they do to start getting on a train of understanding things, getting on course, getting a better understanding, being involved, maybe the local town hall, the local city council. I don't know what that might look like.
Yeah.
What are some steps they can do to start getting on board?
I love this question because we could be as radically imaginative as we want to be. And that's what the current situation that we find ourselves in calls for. There's a quote going around that I absolutely love that says the same people that got us to this point are not going to be the people to get us to where we need to be. And what I mean by that is we have to forge new coalitions, new partnerships. We have to think outside of the box for these big box situations. So for me, if I had to, wipe my memory and start over from scratch, I would start from the ground up. I would ask my community. I go to a coffee shop 2, 3 times a week. I sit and meet with small local businesses. I'm a member of numerous community organizations. Starting there to understand what the pain points of the people are is just absolute ground level. And you could do a lot of that actually on your own. You hit one too many potholes on your way home, you might have to start asking some questions like, okay, what even how do we even go about getting this pothole fixed? Or is this something that I'm gonna have to keep paying $100 a month to get a new tire for? Then you say, okay, well, who are the decision makers? And understanding that there's kind of a value tree or a value chain that you could follow. Okay, well, if my kid has a teacher that's divested, who's my local school board member over my zip, not my zip code, my address? One too many potholes, my lights go out, or I every time I go outside to walk my dog, I smell this weird smell. Let me go to a city council meeting and see if anybody talking about this. Oftentimes you will see there's nobody talking about that. Everybody is just going through as if it's business as usual. And that type of apathy is what will inevitably be our people's upending if we do not get more passionate and fervent about the issues that we face.
You know, I had the pleasure one time. This probably 6 years ago, right? Me and another brother went up to. I'm in Louisiana, by the way. Went
Come
up
on.
to our state capital in Baton Rouge, the huge state capital, and spent like 8 hours there, just going, seeing as bills are being passed and things are being vetoed out. We're seeing how the actual inner workings of these things go, and I know that based on your work or maybe accessibility. Everybody can't do that. Maybe, but I think anybody should really at least one time go and see what they actually look like. Because most times you're only seeing the results of these things on the news that night. Oh, they passed this or they stopped that, whatever. You're not seeing what that looked like in the making, man. And it was a very mind blowing experience for me politically. I tell you
Oh
that.
yeah. And that was actually one of my biggest priorities. Part of what we mentioned earlier about cultivating that community. When I was 15 years old, I went to my very, I'm talking about, you could see how rapid everything happened, because I saw the murders of our young black men. I hosted a rally in my hometown, and then that very next year, I attended my first state legislative session, and not just as a bystander, but I got to meet with my state rep at the time, and I got to advocate for increased school funding for the type of school that I attended,
Wow. And you
and
were
then
like in high school yourself?
yeah, so
That's
I
amazing, man.
during high school, I attended two different state sessions because the school that I went to, it was a very early um, concept called the school of choice. So it was kind of like a charter school, but it was underneath the realm of the public school district. So what that looked like is you had to apply to get in. It was free of charge, but it was a different type of curriculum. So I actually studied information technology. I have a background in video game design and computer programming. So I went to school to make video games, but all of that got pushed to the side whenever I saw black men getting gunned down in the street. But I understood that I had a absolute revolutionary opportunity that not many in my family and my community got to witness, by going to these state conferences and competing in video game design against kids that were studying at Harvard over the summer. And I was in the room, one of the only young black men competing in what I competed in. That actually led me to be a state officer for these organizations that focused on career and technical education. So I got to leverage that as a subtle and subversive way to build relationships with legislators, because I essentially disarmed them when I came to them saying, hey, we should be funding public education. I take shop class. And then 6 months later, they see me and I'm like, okay, about police brutality. What do we plan to do about that? And they're like, wait. I'm like, well, we're here now. So, that's part of what I loved. And to bring that story home is, I brought at least 5 kids from my school district to the state capitol to experience that with me. And I coordinated through across the state to bring over 50 young black and brown student leaders across high school and college campuses to advocate for causes that they believed in. And even now, just this last legislative session, we advocated for the successful passing of numerous bills focused on expanding access to education for low income students and bringing new innovative career opportunities to them. But we also talked about voter ID laws and disenfranchisement, and how we needed to appropriate. Texas is one of the very few states that has a multi-billion-dollar surplus every year. We are the seventh largest economy in the world as a state. And somehow we still have no clean water in Sand Branch, Texas, a predominantly black community just 45 minutes out of where they put in a brand new stock exchange. So we have not we I think we netted $9 billion last year. How can we net $9 billion and we don't have $1.5 million for Kirk County to install early flood warning systems? We don't have $5 to $10 million to redo the pipes for the plumbing and water systems for Sand Branch, Texas. Third Ward, Houston, which many of my family came from, is known as Cancer Alley. We don't have the millions that it would take. Hell, sometimes it's not the millions. Sometimes it's just the hundreds of thousands. So that's why, to your point, it is beyond imperative that people get involved not just at the state level though, because yes, the state capitals are beautiful. Your city council, y'all city hall might be just as good looking if the sun hits it just right, you know? So go meet your city council member.
What impact, what role do influencers and artists, athletes play in today's politics? Because a lot of people today, they get their news and their understanding from social media and entertainers. You talk
Yeah.
about back in the old days in the civil rights movement, it was a lot of what I call suit and tie guys that spend
Come
their
on.
life studying politics, boots on the ground, really, really in the trenches doing it in front of these microphones. But now, with cell phones and platforms like this, we all have a mic, and people are getting their news from anywhere. What role do influencers play in today's political understanding?
Man, that is actually the question of the hour. You know why? The news is dead, man. Um, they had the Texas House Democrats press conference, and people were like, "Oh, it's streaming on WFAA or Fox 26. Just go check your local news." What? Man, I hopped on YouTube with the quickness, and the governor of Illinois had it on his YouTube channel, a live stream. And I can guarantee you more people were tuned in to live streams than they were waiting on their local news reporter to talk about what was going on. Now, do I believe that's a travesty and a tragedy? Absolutely. I've got to connect with some of our local political contributors and anchors across the Metroplex, and they do great work. One that I specifically like to shout out is Stephen Dial, a young black man who actually just got time with the governor, and we all know how the governor of Texas get down. And he actually had a civilized, no nonsense conversation where he had the opportunity to hold his feet to the fire. And I mean, unless you Trump and you inviting the MAGA political influencers from Twitter, because Elon Musk is right next to, well, was right next to Trump at that time. That's how those political influencers got those Epstein files. Well, the governor probably not gonna take no questions with no TikTokers right now, man. But guess what? We don't need to be taking questions or asking questions when we can see their actions. What we need is somebody who is capable of synthesizing that information and bringing it to the community that needs to be informed. So that's the role of influencers. That's the role of artists. Because honestly, yeah, we had those suit and ties, but we also had Sam Cooks. We also had Nina Simone's. We also had Malcolm, not just Malcolm X's, but Muhammad Ali's. We also, come on, man. We had some real archons that were standing up and speaking
But
truth to power.
my brother, when you talk about the athletes of that time, Kareem
Yeah,
Abdul-Jabbar,
come on.
um, Bill Russell, a lot of those guys, when you
Yeah.
study those guys, they were still up under the feet
Oh
of the
yeah.
student tie scholars. So
Exactly.
a lot of guys of today's athletes, right? They go and put them in front of a microphone. So and so, what's your thoughts about this thing? And they just shoot from the
Yeah,
hip, right?
I ain't worried about that.
You
I'm
see a
worried about
person,
football.
unfortunately, you see a person like Janet Jackson say something and she's misspeaking, not because she don't care or she's being evil, malicious. It's not in her universe. All of a sudden, the mic in my face about this thing, and we're not asking a person that actually studies this thing.
Come on.
A person like
And that's a
yourself,
deliberate
you
attempt.
you, you spent your early life in this 24/7. I'm making fun of somebody like your face versus a basketball player, a football guy. And
Right.
all respect to that. I'm a sport guy myself, but I like the specialist to be in front of the specialist. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying? When it comes to video games, I want the video game guy telling me
exactly.
about the future of video games, not a random. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I think that's actually a part of the broader, like I said earlier, the disillusionment, because that camaraderie, we can't have that. And as you've seen, we don't got to get too deep into it, but we do. Kyrie Irving, people like himself, people like Colin Kaepernick, people like, this is gonna pain me to say, but it's the truth. Barack Obama undermining the effort of athletes like LeBron James, Chris Paul, and Dwayne Wade when they wanted to sit out during COVID and during the George Floyd unrest. Barack Obama calling and saying, "Hey man, don't do that. There's other ways to do it. Don't protest. So we don't need just any suit and tie guys. We need the right
'Cause
suit and tie guys, and we need the
my,
right message.
we know historically they want us to always stay entertained. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Shut
It's
up
like
and dribble.
that sleight of hand thing, right? The Colin Kaepernick stuff was going on. All that was going on politically at that time with Colin Kaepernick. Like, no, we need the football still in the air. We need the football going.
Right.
And there's something about protesting football at that time. Same way we're gonna stop playing until this thing happens. They know we still playing football. You know what I'm saying?
No,
Keep the football
I
going.
actually I wanted to play football. I ain't got the figure for it, but I grew up in Texas where you had to pay your dues. So, I was a wide receiver and a cornerback. I have not watched the down of football since 2015 or 16. Just because I said, you know what, we need to focus. And a lot of folks, they kind of look at me like, man, you can't have no fun. I was like, hey, hold on now. We out here having fun. This is the culture where fun came from in so many ways. But at the same time, we do have a moral imperative where we need to lock in. And it's that simple. And I wish that we would have been able to capitalize on that moment to say, okay, Colin, come sit at the feet of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. Come sit at the feet of the president of the NAACP. Let's get you connected with our sports bureau, our Hollywood bureau. Let's amplify your message and your narrative and mobilize around it. But they wanted us to be so divided so they could distract us and keep us from really building a people powered grassroots movement, which is what is going to be needed to get us to where we need to be.
Yes, sir. With so much misinformation flooding our timelines, how could once again educate us? How could a person find reliable sources, trustworthy news sources? There's so many things that's flooded. Of course, we know a lot of media is paid for now. It's not really unbiased, kind of pretty
Right.
much anywhere. I don't know anymore. So, what are you going to get your news? Is a better question. Where you find your news?
So, citizen journalists, investigative journalists, real independent news organizations. I do not watch CNN. I do not watch MSNBC. I do not. You already know the other ones that I don't watch, but I'm gonna just go ahead and say I do not watch Fox News. I do not watch. It's a new right wing news network, but those don't get any of my airtime. Democracy Now gets my airtime. Roland Martin gets my airtime. In Texas specifically, the Houston Chronicle and the Texas Tribune get my airtime. Even the Dallas Morning News, they get my airtime for business and local politics, but they do not get my airtime on forming critical analysis and opinions on what is happening in the world and what social media, the advent of technology, and us living in an information age. I just can't stress that enough, man. Of all the things that we could have named the age that we live in, it is the information age. So we need to really be leaning into that because in reality, this is more power than what sent two men to the moon and got them there and back in my hand. So now I'm able to, instead of saying let me wait for somebody to form an opinion, I could go directly to the ground zero is what they call it. When things happen across, for example, what's happening in Texas, a lot of the grassroots organizers that I know from outside of Texas, they're not saying, let me go look at what the governor is saying on the news or wait for CNN to make a 15-minute panel discussion about it. Let me call Nick. It's that simple. So getting proximate to the people that have the information and aggregating it, that is actually why I'm such a huge fan of decentralized initiatives. Something that the late great Fannie Lou Hamer really beat into the Southern movement of freedom farmers because she knew the stakes then. If they come after her and they got her, then that was just going to disorient the entire movement. But if she empowered everybody to be farmers, it wasn't just everybody come to my farm and contribute. It was everybody start a farm and we gonna farm together and build our own networks. So we need to be building our new information networks from the ground up, and we can't wait on folks like Don Lemon, Joy Reid, and of course not Angela Rye to be doing that work for us.
That remind me of whenever Fred Hampton said, "You can kill the revolution, but you can't kill the revolutionaries." Like it's not just me. You can take me out, but you can't take out. And we all doing it. We all branching out. We all learning. Politicized. You can't knock all of us out. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And that's essentially what this has to become. That is why 52 representatives of the Texas House of Representatives, they're not going to make or break the movement. It is going to be what we do around their actions that help rechart and reshape the trajectory. There's a famous quote that the arc of justice is long, but it bends towards justice, but only if we are willing to put in the work. So, are we willing to put in the work? The valiant representatives from the Texas House, they put in the work, but that ain't all the work to be put in. We need to be building coalitions of citizens. We need to be forming coalitions of legislators. We need to be developing our own policies and think tanks and not letting the Texas Public Policy Research and the Heritage Foundation do that for us. We need to let these people know that beyond a poll, because it's already said over 90% of Americans, they want to see them Epstein files. And over 70% of Texans don't want mid-decade redistricting. But it's clear that a poll don't got no teeth to it. So how do we go get us some teeth? What does that look like from the ground up? Because if we count on the same legislature that will look at those same poll numbers that I just quoted and say, y'all not going to turn out and vote anyways, man. We need to start looking at other alternatives because they'll never give us the equity and the justice that we not only need but deserve.
Do you think that media literacy should be taught more actively, like in school and in public spaces? And for myself, recently, I've been doing a lot more studying media, studying the background of media, and you got to do your homework. You got to follow the money, as they say. You got to realize who is behind certain outlets. I'm a little bit older than you are. I'm in my 40s, right?
Come
It seemed like when I was a shorty, for an example, watching the 10 o'clock news or something like that with my grandfather, before they had cable television, before streaming and downloading, the news seemed more like straightforward than it
Right.
ever is now. It didn't seem so leaning as it is now. Um, but that media literacy got to be up a lot more now than ever before. It seemed like.
Man, media literacy, I'm a big financial literacy guy because I worked in corporate finance and I'm an investment advisor. But literacy as a overall encompassing concept, that is so important, man. We have to do it across media. We have to do it across finance. We have to do it within our community, having a sense of community literacy and spatial awareness to even yourself, being literate of what it means to be who you are. That is all a part of what makes us whole. And the media literacy is so foundational to that because you will let inadvertently, you will let these systems, these outlets reshape how you view yourself and give away all agency. And we can't allow that if we want to be a resilient people for the next century, for the next millennia. We have to develop that literacy. And I think it starts beyond the school because I believe, hey, school, let's have a very honest conversation. School is an institution, and we have to be very wary about the institutions that we pour our faith into. I think that media literacy starts at the most nuclear institution of them all, and that is the household. And I think that what that looks like and should look like is an act and an art of curation of even things like right now I'm in a relationship and we're planning for marriage, we're planning for children, and we're having the conversation now. We want our kid around these types of people. We want our kid around these types of programs, organizations, habits, cultures, traditions. We need to imbue our tradition with transparency, accuracy, discernment, and that, I think those three things are what constitutes the foundation of what true media literacy looks like.
You said that right, man, because my grandparents played a large part in raising me, right? So my grandfather always had 5 or 6 different papers coming to the house all the time.
Right.
And I can't speak, he passed last year. I can't speak for him now, but it seemed to me like I don't want to just read one paper and feel like I know everything. Like I want to read
Right.
across and see how these stories are being covered in these different places of media and getting different perspectives and deducing my analysis on that
Right.
after I go through 4 or 5 different sources, not just one source.
And it requires that much of us. And unfortunately, the pro and the con is that we live in such a society that has been boiled down to the concept of instant gratification, that we have now incentivized, oh, well, you should just be happy that I'm even reading the news. But it might be the one source, the worst source out of those four sources that you could have read. And you're like, well, now I feel equipped. I'm about to go quote it in an argument on Twitter, and I'm gonna feel vindicated. And then when somebody come through with 2, 3 sources and just shatter your world, now it's a concept of, well, instead of admitting that I'm wrong, I'm gonna just tense up and fight back, kicking and screaming. Well, like you said, your grandfather, the work that he did, that takes some diligence. In a process that whenever we would buy a company, it was called doing our due diligence, where I couldn't just look at the financials that they sent me in a nice cleaned up spreadsheet. I needed their month to month. And not only did I need their month to month, I needed to go out of my way and do research on companies that were in their industry, in their geography, in their market share, and say, okay, well, if you a $30 million business and you say you made this much a month, and here's a $40 million business and they said they made that much a month, how could you rationalize that? And I think that's a key part that I failed to mention that is just absolutely essential. We have to be not only diligent, but part of that diligence is being willing and capable of scrutinizing the data that we take in. Ask questions, push back, say why. Three letters might change your entire paradigm. And you could radically reshape your perspective just by asking why sometimes. What is the motivation behind this paper including this person's name and a picture of them with a family versus this paper calling them a felon and giving us their mugshot? Let alone everything else that you might come across in the article. But even those small subversive tidbits can help you craft your overall uh your overall perspective, and that's something that I just think is something that we
Yeah,
can't, it isn't a optional thing, it's a mandatory
yeah.
thing for the future.
We mentioned history earlier. We're history buff on this channel. We love history and
Yeah.
everything. The more I study the Pullman porters from back in the
Oh,
day, and seeing how those brothers and the sisters on the trains, they valued the news so much. Whenever a white person would put their paper, fold it up, put it down, and just leave, they would take those papers and bring it across the country back to their cities, back to the barbershop, back to the churches, back to the community, like showing them that was their social media at the time. I'm showing you the news
right.
from everywhere. And now we getting on game in this little small country town. We getting on game of what's happening other places, right? And
That's
then the more
powerful.
you study the history of most of our major movements, they all had their own press.
Right.
W.E.B. Du Bois with the Crisis,
On the crisis,
Marcus Garvey, UNIA movement had their own papers.
the final
Black
call.
Panther Party
Yeah.
got their own papers. Of course, Nation of Islam to this day, you in Dallas, Nation of Islam, Final Call newspaper. I still get those. Like
Yeah, I get them too, so yeah.
they valued the information so much is my point in saying that. So that made me want to get more active. Like, you know what? I'm gonna start getting the paper more often. And then that
Right.
became I want to find some black news outlets. That became more, keep on going with the progress.
And to that point, I think it's the National Black Publishers Association, NBPA. They are the ones behind World Press, and that is a culmination of all of the different black-owned news outlets that are still present. So I know we have the Dallas Examiner, we have Metro Dallas News, and then we have Dallas Weekly. Those are three of our big black publications, and it's a part of this overarching network across the nation, kind of like you said with the Pullman Porters,
Yep.
of okay, this is local news where they are soliciting individual citizen journalists to go sit in on a city council meeting and take notes, asking, people to contribute opinion pieces and help keep their communities informed on what's happening locally, to where they're in the know.
'Cause initially, we got to all start somewhere, right? I started subscribing to the Washington Post, New York Times, USA Today, and then as time, I said, you know what? I want to get our perspectives. I want to get our culture, our things that matter to us. So I started being more active, seeking out. This is the Carolina Press, and it's a black-owned press.
Come on.
I mean, on top of my head, it's a North Carolina Press, but I started being more serious about trying to find our news.
Yeah, I think for me, it was really just a matter of seeing them present in our community. There's one that I failed to shout out initially, but I have to give their love: the Dallas Free Press. They created what's called the Dallas Documenters Campaign, which is incentivizing, training, and paying individuals to go and become active stewards of the narratives in their community. Because who better to articulate the message than the people that need and are most proximate to the message being said stated. So they train a group of citizens every month, I believe, to okay, this is what notes you need to be on the lookout for. These are the meetings we're going to assign you to, whether it be in West Dallas, focusing on environmental issues, to South Dallas, uplifting issue areas like Shingles Mountain and food insecurity. And then they'll have you come back and write stories about this. And I think that collaborative nature is part of what is going to help push us further as a collective whole, because us having the information on our own, being exceptional and unique individuals is cool and all that, but we all got to get that. We all got to get there.
You're totally right about that, man. Um, I'm a part of another podcast in the morning, the Truth Be Told podcast, and on that show, we do get a lot more political and things like that. So that thrust me into even being more on top of the news. So I found this source called the Ground News, right? And what the Ground News does, you'll see a story, and it's a little bar, and it shows you the blue, where it's left leaning, the
Mm.
red for the right leaning, then the white in the middle. And
Yep.
so, any given news story, you can find sources where you find the most unbiased in the middle on that particular story. And so, I started following the Ground News. Past couple of weeks, I subscribed to the Ground News, man, and I think it's definitely good at finding reliable sources.
Yeah, I love organizations like that. There's one that I like to keep abreast of for geopolitical and wartime, especially with everything that happened this year within the Middle East and Russia. And it exposed me to this concept called OSINT, OSINT, and that stands for Open Source Intelligence. And Ground News is a big proponent of that. And that's kind of how they develop their okay, is this left leaning, right leaning, or is it centrist? And it's been very interesting to see how information could move at light speed. Whenever there was the war between Israel and Iran, within minutes, you would learn who shot what missile where, what bomb got dropped on what, and who pressed the button. So, that has helped to keep me abreast of geopolitical issues. But I think that we need something like that for community based issues. And there's a ton of initiatives that are currently being worked on in the shadows that, hopefully by the end of the year, we'll be able to bring to the light.
You mentioned earlier in the show before we wrap up. You mentioned earlier in the show having that computer science kind of a background and video game background. What do you think that we can do with today's technology to get us our own platforms and have that better news source, have that community-based news thing? What could we do and use this technology on our side and use some of these tools to make platforms, man?
Man, I think that that question was designed just for me because I have been in cryptocurrency for the past decade, and understanding what the infrastructure actually does versus the hype not only has helped me capitalize off of the investment implications of it, but beyond being an individual investor, it has helped me understand the ethos behind it. Now, to break it down in a TLDR and how it's proximate to our people and even more so proximate to our revolution and liberation, cryptocurrency is a decentralized ledger that tracks transactions of all kinds. And I want you to think about transactions beyond the confines of just a dollar for a dollar or a dollar for a piece of candy. But I want you to look at a transaction as a piece of information for a piece of information. So, what that looks like for real life implications of how I've been able to build a ecosystem within the blockchain that empowers specifically black and brown issues is by creating what's called as a decentralized autonomous organization. And that's an organization of contracts, computer code, and people that all gather and coordinate around specific initiatives. So the initiative that I focused on for the fall of 2021 was that of called 40 acres. So 40 acres is a traditional trope of the 40 acres and a mule that all emancipated slaves were promised as part of General Order 15 or number 3. And as you know, that never came. If anything, previous slave owners were the ones that got reparations. Meanwhile, we got Freedmen's Bank, which was ran bankrupt by the same people that held us captive. So now 40 Acres is a new decentralized initiative in the same spirit of what Fannie Lou Hamer was trying to get us to understand and say, okay, well, look, we can't really rely on just one huge figure. We need to be building cooperative community power. So, what does that look like? Everybody has their crypto wallet. Why don't we all put $1 a month into this program? Well, if that's 500 people in that program, that's $500 a month. And it might not sound like a lot then, but we started in 2021 when Bitcoin was $10,000. Now today, Bitcoin is nearly $120,000. So that $500 a month, you know, so there are a ton of different opportunities for us to create our own new mediums of value in which we don't have to necessarily rely on the traditional system of quote unquote getting rich, but we could more importantly redefine what getting rich looks like because we could put into the code more philanthropic approaches that we could invest in our community. One of the biggest programs that I spearheaded during my time in blockchain was flood relief for Nigeria. We saw a once in 100 or 1,000 year flood that killed hundreds, if not thousands, of people and affected over 30 different states across Nigeria. Well, by selling those same NFTs that people want to call monkey pictures, we were able to raise millions of naira to send to help get people shelter, help get people food. And then beyond that, we were able to help get people laptops and provided scholarships for Black women to study computer science so they could not only participate, but they could help be the next generation of builders. So when it looks like leveraging new technology, I need my people to not just run to, but run beyond, because yes, it's cool to participate and everybody and their mama downloaded the chat gpt app. We need to be building our own proprietary large language models. We need to be curating our own petabyte worth of data sets. We need to be building our own blockchains. But This disillusionment wants us to look at it as nothing more than monkey pictures, or, oh, well, Bitcoin ain't got nothing for me, or, oh, it's too late for me to invest, or, oh, it's too hard, so I'm just not going to do it at all. You know who did it? Our president. He made $8 billion in his first month of being in office by releasing Trump coin. 40% of his net worth today came from a weekend of launching a cryptocurrency and selling it to the highest bidder. It's some people that I know that bought $500 worth of Trump coin that turned it into tens and thousands of dollars. So part of that disillusionment, when we got people that are struggling to keep the lights on in some communities, people that can't feed themselves and their kids in some communities, saying, "Nah, you gotta have money to get money. Nah, that ain't for us. It'll never be for us." And I need us to be, like I said earlier, radically imaginative when it comes to solving the issues that we face in today's times, because they're only going to get bigger if we don't rise to meet the moment.
You mentioned at the top of the show, before we came on the air this weekend, you're looking forward to the weekend, man. Tell us all about what's going on with you this weekend.
Yeah, man. And if I could, I'd love to talk about these upcoming weekends, because August
Yeah, go ahead. Do your thing.
is, to do it from a historical perspective. This month is Black August. Black August is a month in which we commemorate and revere those that laid their lives down and are currently held as political prisoners, across the country and across the world. We venerate those revolutionaries such as Thomas Sankara, Kwame Nkrumah, Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture. Everybody that
George
fought.
Jackson.
Come on, the dragon. So the reason why we do this is because we won't allow their history to be erased. Because for the dominant party, that history is unseemly. It ain't good looking enough for them. It ain't sanitized. But unless we get ready and willing to do the hard thing, which is at times telling that unsanitized history, our learning will be handicapped. So this month, Black Men Build, an organization that I've been a part of, is doing a study of revolutionary suicide, the book that Huey P. Newton wrote, one of my favorite books. So every Wednesday at 7 p.m., they do a virtual call. And then also this upcoming weekend, a part of the work that I'm doing with the Dallas Fort Worth Urban League Young Professionals, we're hosting a leadership retreat in Dallas. So that leadership retreat is, like I said earlier, that lighthouse on the bay, that flag in the sand that says, "Hey, we need you. This is where we're gonna be at. This is what we're gonna be talking about. This is the power that we're gonna be building." And then next weekend, we're going to follow that up by focusing on two initiatives. One being National Day of Wellness through the National Urban League. So we're going to be doing an adult field day where we'll be focusing on mental health, physical health, and building a communal sense of health. And then we'll be following that up with the Sunny South Dallas Food Park, which is our flagship place-based activation that we've been doing now for going on 3 years, where we've brought out almost 300 Black-owned businesses that are specifically focused on serving the South Dallas community that has been disenfranchised for nearly 100 years, to say, "Hey, let's not give, but let's get our power back. Let's invest in one another like our lives depend on it, because they do." And we'll be doing that at the South Dallas Cultural Center. So, it's a ton of calls to actions if you in the city, and I'd love to meet you in person.
I wanna mention something right quick, man. You mentioned earlier in the show the NAACP. You just mentioned the Urban League, right? And Dr. Wade in the building. She's a part of Dr. Carter G. Woodson's organization, Asala, I believe it is, right?
Yep.
So it's like a lot of people in today's time, if you're not in those rooms, they think or they act as if those things are dead and they're not anymore. You mentioned a current civil rights movement. I never hear that phrase even used in today's time, right? So these things are still functioning, they're still alive and well. We need more spotlight on what these organizations are doing in these communities, man.
Man, and not just the spotlight, we need to actually build in mechanisms where we are intentionally supporting what the next iteration of these organizations look like. That's something that as a 25-year-old black man, um, I had to face head first. I was not about to come into an organization and not have my voice be heard. I was not about to come into an organization and be directed to fight for something that I didn't understand or get behind. And what's the best way to get behind and understand something is to help craft that narrative to begin with. So, yeah,
But is it a matter of, like they say, you want something to be a certain way, you got to be hands on in making it that way. So there is some backlash toward the NAACP, for an example. Like it takes you actively being a part of your local or whatever chapter and doing something about whatever it is, not just looking at it like, ah, well, they doing this or they
yeah.
not doing that. It's gonna be what you make it, right?
And I'll be honest, there are so many. It is a multifaceted, protracted struggle, and that is the most diplomatic way that I can say that you will face enemies externally and internally that will try and upend and dishevel your progress for the sake of the movement. But as long as you keep the movement front, center in your heart and in your mind at all times, there will be nothing that can stop you but God. And I'm gonna just go ahead and say it. We on the side that God's on, and the other side is where the other side is. So I think that to that point, you're gonna face pushback, whether it be from the community that you look to serve. Sometimes I've just architected and crafted community-based initiatives that at times the community has come kicking and screaming to be served with. However, I knew in my heart of hearts it was a priority, not just of mine, but it would solve a first principles issue in our community. And by empowering people and bringing people along and not just trying to be a patron or a patron and say, oh, well, I'm doing this from the kindness of my heart, or I'm trying to position myself for a political run, then you can solicit that collective buy-in of folks to say, hey, let me see how I could contribute. Let me see how I can play a part. Nick, you need any help? Okay, y'all got a committee y'all can lead? Let me tap in for $30 a year. A lot of people spend that on for what I'm gonna just call their vices.
Uh,
But look,
coffee, coffee,
look,
French fries,
look.
burgers.
I'm talking about worse than that. But
I
so
get it, I get it,
I'm
I get
like,
it.
if your liberation for a year don't cost what that costs, why not make that investment? Especially when we're standing on 100-year infrastructure. The NAACP is 115 or 16 years old. The Urban League is 115 years old. We need to be leveraging the meeting minutes that was taken in 1926 when they was in the darkest depths of the black codes to say, hold on, they try and reinstitute these black codes, but call it fairness.
Cause my brother, why reinvent the wheel?
Why
I asked
reinvent
you
the wheel?
about your ideas of what you think MLK would say in today's time, right? We are not seeing anything new. So much of this stuff that we're facing right now, our ancestors faced, and even like you just said, they face even worse than what we're facing right now. So it's
Right.
like we can learn so much to look back, and it's that same Kofa, right? Looking back to go forward, we can learn so much from what they already get. They get a whole blueprint already.
They gave
There's
us a,
nothing to create. It's already there. It's just implementing what they put there.
and we just have to be courageous in 2025 to understand they set the precedent, they set the foundation, and we are either going to chip away at the foundation or we are going to turn it into a launch pad and go to where we've never been before because that's where we need to be. So that's what I'm committed to. And that's what I've been committed to for this past decade. And I believe that it's my life's work, you know? I
Okay.
would have loved to just kick it and make video games. But I think that there's something much more pressing, and that demands my entire initiative. That's why I left corporate America. That's why I started my own company that wasn't focused on a dollar, but was focused on community impact. And that's why I'm here today. And I'm going to
Yeah.
keep being here today. So I appreciate you
So
for in space, man.
This is my final question for you. It's an important question, my brother, because I know a lot of community leaders as well, long time leaders and advocates and everything. What keeps you so far? What keeps you from burning out? The burnout is real. The more we study history, we see a lot of these black power leaders and what happened to them in their elder years. You see a lot of the civil rights people, what happened to them. So it's like, again, the community that you're serving might not always be serving to you, right? And your health and your family. So how do you avoid burnout with all this stuff?
Man, so a few ways in which I avoid burnout is I am in the church every Sunday. If I'm not there physically, I am taking pages worth of notes during a live stream session, Bible study, yoga, stretching every morning, drinking my water and my tea, grounding myself in my community, and then also on a more esoteric tip, if we could go there, um, really just understanding that the community is me and I am the community. So, in part of being burnt out from the work, I know that we all have a role to play, and we have to develop a pipeline of people that care just as much as us, but have their own unique perspective that they could contribute to make what I oftentimes refer to as the collective whole. Because, when it comes to financial strategy, business acumen, philanthropy, and decentralized blockchain technology, I got that. But do I got urban planning down? Do I got pharmacy down? I see we got Dr. Wade in the building. Do I got the deep expertise of literature and journalism down? No. So why not go be intentional and build community to where I can lean on them and they can lean on me and we can lean on each other, and boom, that's how the pyramids got constructed.
You said the perfect. I've been saying this for years, man. So many times a person think that what they're doing is the most important thing, right? Like the people that can go to the state capitol and they can lobby and all that, they think like they're doing the most important thing. The people that can be boots on the ground when it's time to march and get maced and get bit by dogs, they thinking like this the most real thing. The
Mm,
people that are doing the things behind the scenes and doing other outlets, like every person think that their thing is the only thing when it's like
man.
we need the whole pie. We
Yeah,
need all of y'all doing your thing. Don't just vote. Yes, go to the poll and vote, but then also be a part of this. You know what I'm saying?
exactly.
It's not just the one thing, bro.
And it takes a lot of, like, I've been leaning on to during this conversation, and it's funny because some people would be like, what do you mean, like it takes courage to? No, it really does take courage to put your pride, to kill your pride, and say like, hey, I might be great at this, but this is a side dish, and we need 3 courses. We're not about to eat the same side dish for all 3 courses. Now, if we struggling and we down to the last and all we got is grain, we might have to make those 3 courses stretch, or that side dish stretch for 3 courses. But understanding that we live in an abundance of resources, an abundance of creativity, an abundance of capacity, it is not. And this is where, to bring it full circle with the whole, we don't need any more Martins or Malcolms, that's where I get to a point. Okay, well, we don't quite need one person to take on the entire mantle, but those people, to me, lack the understanding of history to know that, yeah, you might have seen him give the speeches, but if you think that Martin simultaneously was running his own security detail, balancing the books, writing the speeches, doing the logistics, and liaising between politicians, then you just didn't dig deep enough throughout the movement to understand that SNCC, SCLC, the nation all had different divisions that came together to create the collective whole. So we need more collective wholes and less folks that want to be, oh, the end all be all. And that
And
to me, yeah.
this is why I love the series The Godfather of Harlem so much. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I might have mentioned that one show more than anything on this platform because you see the gangster Bumpy Johnson, right? But you see him working closely with Malcolm X with the Nation of Islam,
Come on.
and they're doing certain things in the community in Harlem, right? You seeing um, the pastor on there, right? You seeing what he's doing. You see them all work together. You see them with the actual the Italian mob and whatnot. but like it's all a big circle. It's not like one or the other. It's you see them
Right.
collectively doing certain things episode by episode, and they bump heads sometimes, and they come together sometimes. But they all got to be together. Is the point?
And that's something that just to because I know we running close to time, but I would just absolutely be remiss if I didn't mention this. It was an intentional effort for us to not be coordinating like that again. It was a reason. COINTELPRO, a very real program that has no end date in sight, has been instituted within our community to sow division, distrust, and dissent so it could distract us from what really matters. A lot of people don't like to speak truth to power and call it what it is. However, we're at the point where that's the only option left, because at this point you just lying to yourself. In the information age, when we could look up the redacted memos, we could look at the lawsuits that certain entities and three-letter agencies lost when they tried to say, oh, well, we didn't kill this person. One last plug that I'll give is the soundtrack to a coup d'etat. That is a documentary that is on YouTube right now that details with irrefutable evidence, firsthand testimony and account of who came together to kill Patrice Lumumba. And it hit
Bruh,
different.
I'm glad you said that. So Dr. Way in the building once again. It's a book that she was showing on her page a couple of days ago. The FBI war on Tupac Shakur, right? The FBI war on Tupac Shakur. But you get a whole trajectory way before Tupac was even born, what they did with Marcus Garvey, what they did with MLK. You see them what they're doing these same patterns over and over again. Until when they get to Tupac, it becomes so clear a lot of what they do. And once again, they got records, you got data, you got court records, you got testimonies, you got all that stuff is inside these publications, man.
Right. Even with the Uhuru 3, that is a very recent and very real case that, you know, the government, a democratically elected government, said, "Hey, y'all supporting it and y'all working with Russia?" Mind you, they weren't working with Russia to plant pipe bombs in city council chambers. They were working with Russia to build a critical consciousness, and they weren't working with the state. They were working with other liberators that, focused on how the Pan-Africanist struggle relates to the world. Pan means world. So even though the
Come
Uhuru
on,
3
man.
was in Detroit and St. Louis, they
Come
were
on, man.
focused on what was happening in Mali and Burkina Faso. But the
And
Biden
brother,
administration put them in prison because they thought that, oh, well, anybody working with Russia is an enemy of Americans. Well, if people working in Russia are working to liberate and support black solidarity, okay, what are we doing? So yeah, I definitely don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but I do need to tell the truth, because the Uhuru 3 is a very real case that a lot of people, especially during the election season, were like, "Oh, well, as black people, like, you just owe these people your vote. They've done more than enough work to deserve your vote," and they were literally, you could Google the Uhuru 3 right now and who dropped their charges. They were literally prosecuting black freedom fighters that weren't violent, weren't treasonous, but were trying to coordinate. I actually believe that they arrested a white woman.
mm-hmm,
So so
mm-hmm,
it
mm-hmm.
it was a
It probably
real
so.
repressive effort to just show you
Yeah.
how much they didn't care about
But
democracy.
when you said that, man, it sparked my mind again. Looking at history, our leaders were always global minded. It was never just us. Malcolm X, Huey P. Newton, Stokely Carmichael, Angela Davis. These people always addressed Palestine and other places, and they always talked about other places abroad. It was never just about us directly here in the U.S., man. I always admire, once again, just understanding your local politics is hard enough for most people.
Man,
To understand globally,
yeah,
before they had social media, to
exactly.
understand global matters is amazing how brilliant they were to me.
Yeah, man. And that's that's one point. I'm gonna rail against one more person because I've been giving some folks some hell this interview, man. But the last group of people I will, unfortunately, is the FBA and ADOS folks, because that directly contradicts the Pan Africanist lens that our community needs in order for us to get to where we need to be. We are not going to go where we need to go if we only focus on the Southern Crescent, because the same injustices that are being witnessed in Dallas, Texas, and Third Ward, Houston, are being witnessed in Sudan, in the DRC, in Palestine. And now it's like, okay, do you think that once we get our justice and they're still being the victims of injustice, then things are just going to be cool? Like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Every yes,
So it is
and that's
imperative.
why
Yeah, we can't afford to just say, oh, well, that ain't my issue. That don't concern me.
yes, like this whole thing with the whole ICE thing going on, right? We seeing these what do they call it? Alligator Alcatraz, right down there in Florida.
Yeah,
We seeing
alligator
people being
Alcatraz.
deported, different things happening. We seeing what's going on, but some of us feel like, man, they ain't our issue, they ain't our thing. But it's like you don't think they're gonna all of a sudden flip a light switch overnight and say, you know what? We did it to them, we gonna do it to them too.
Especially if you follow the news, because one thing that the president is pushing for is to end birthright citizenship. Do you think that that would negatively impact the white people that were born in America? Or do you think that that's going to be a direct affront to black people for him to be able to say, we're going to go ahead and fly you to Libya and drop you off pre-trial? You haven't seen a judge. You haven't been found guilty of any specific crime. We're just going to fly you out to El Salvador and then we'll figure it out from there. And you'll be in a cell right next to a domestic terrorist.
And you know, so many of them, they can't even look at us and decipher if you're from somewhere else or you're literally U.S. born. You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
If that's your,
that's
they can't look at you and decipher that in Walmart. Like, oh, he from so and so. You know what I'm saying?
and that's why it's so interesting to see, because the one group that I've seen marginalized the most, it hasn't been a Hispanic group. It has been the Haitians. And the Haitians are a group that literally, they are the only group in the world to be in the present day penalized for liberating themselves against slavery. That is why there are still sanctions on Haiti. That is why our president sent a warlord who was over a private military company committing atrocities in the Middle East to now use drones in Haiti. And we see what drones are doing in places like Ukraine, where they're flying drones into the legs of their soldiers and latching explosives onto them and dropping them from high altitudes. And do you think that Eric Prince, the founder of Blackwater, one of the most violent and repressive private military companies known to man, is going to use those drones ethically? So no,
Now,
that's what words be so.
again, Dr. Wade in the building. The book, The Bodies Keep Coming. He talked about in Dallas, the brother that was sniping the officers, right?
Mhm.
And they used a robotic dog or
Right,
robotic whatever to blow the brother up. The first
exactly.
time on U.S. soil. You know what I'm saying? Like,
And they
you know,
and once you realize that those strategies came from the Middle East, where we send our police officers and soldiers to train, you understand why it's not a possibility for you to even think that you can't not be globalist in your political perspectives. So I think it's just another tool of the institutions and the powers that be to keep us subjugated, to say, no, 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 just focus on your issue. Don't focus on their issue too, because you're going to notice too many consistencies and overlap. And you're going to want to organize with them. And we could suppress you on your own, but I don't know if we could suppress each and every one of you on these different fronts. I got a big German Shepherd in the background.
It's all good. It's all good, my brother. We're gonna wrap it up right here, man. But man, I love talking to you, my brother. It's so much happening in the world right now. I would love to bring you on, at a further time and date, man, to break down some more things and increase some more political understanding, man. If that's cool with you.
Man, I would love to, because if you could you give me like a just one more minute
Do
to
you
talk
think? Do you
about
think?
the
Do you
current
think?
status?
Yeah, go
So
ahead.
we hit off on a background and the how redistricting and gerrymandering came to be. I didn't get to spend as much time to tell y'all about where we at right now. So what happened in Texas after Trump made that call and said, "Give me 5 more seats," is the governor wanted to give him 5 more seats with no pushback, just rolled over on his back like my German Shepherd and said, "Hey, how many seats you want? I could go get them for you." What he did is he said, "We're going to do a redistricting process." That process in Texas typically takes 6 months. We got our maps in 2 weeks. We got our maps with no public input. They said that they wanted public input, so they hid the maps from us. For 2 weeks, we went to hearings, hundreds, if not thousands of people testified. Like I said, today, less than 10 hours ago, 120 people signed up to speak, and only 3 of them were in favor of redistricting. And I'm going to say 2 of them was a joke. All 3 of them was clowns. So what happens with the way that our state legislature is set up is that we can testify all we want. We can say we don't want this as much as we want. We could poll to the cows come home. But in the Republican majority House of Representatives, in the Republican majority Senate, and the Republican majority governor's office, they don't have any way that they're going to get down to a vote of A's and Nays and that map not pass. So the only option that they had was to leave the state and deny a quorum. And a quorum is basically if we got 100 people in the chamber, we need at least 66 to be present for us to vote on anything. So we know that the majority of people support what's going on. But if the majority of people decline to show up, well, then we not doing nothing. So what the governor has did is he signed arrest warrants. What the attorney general has done is he's filed lawsuits. And what the president has done is he's authorized the FBI to go into these places where the Democratic representatives are and bring them back to Texas, bound and handcuffed, and to tie them down to their desk and make them vote against the will of the people. But beyond that, because I want you to understand there's an overlapping ripple effect. Because while we're doing this podcast, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that there are other podcasts of other ilks going on across the country right now. Other groups that are on signal mobilizing in ways in which would really be considered treason. My representative, unfortunately, not my representative, because for some reason, my representative in my House district didn't break quorum. But we're going to talk about that another day. But for those that were courageous enough to do so, they woke up to a bomb threat yesterday. And the governor, the president, the attorney general, the same representatives calling them cowards, have yet to condemn that act of political violence. So is somebody going to have to get killed for us to do the right thing? When Spike Lee told us over 30 years, always do the right thing. So that's where we at today with it. They're still trying to give this sham some legitimacy, and it has none, and it won't ever have any. Not until we take it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has the courage, the fortitude to say, you know what? We know Trump appointed us. We know he gonna give us some backlash, but these are lifelong seats. He can't do nothing to us. Let's vote our conscience. Let's do the right thing. But I don't know. It ain't looking too good. So we'll that's what we're gonna pick up from on the next time, because by then I anticipate there'll be some updates. We're forming a grassroots coalition down here in the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex, and we're hoping to take it nationwide. So I can't wait to give you some updates on how we fighting this good fight and speaking truth to power.
Okay, my brother, for sure, man. I'm trying to bring you back sooner than later, man. We can get an update, get an understanding of what we need to do on our end as citizens to understand what's going on, man, and be active, man.
Yes, sir. It's gonna take all of us because we all we got, man. I
That's
appreciate you for
right.
what you're doing.
Oh man, the blessing is all mine, man. The blessing is all mine. Thanks so much for the audience in the chat, man. On August the 15th, I'll be right back with the award-winning book, Swift River, the Ernest J. Gaines award-winning book. Swift River will be here August the 15th. Flyer coming soon. Thank y'all very much. Peace.